They told me to give up my own bedroom, the one I'd grown up in, so my sister's kids could have a safe space. And when I calmly said no, my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you walk out, don't ever come back." I didn't even blink. I just smiled and said, "Good." "Hi, I'm Lily, and I used to think staying quiet meant keeping the peace. But when my sister's family took over our parents' house and treated me like I was just free labor, I finally realized something had to change. What I did next? Well, let's just say they never saw it coming. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I always told myself I'd only stay for 3 months, maybe 4. Back in college, I used to daydream about a tiny apartment just outside downtown Pittsburgh, maybe on the second floor of an old brownstone. Big windows, soft light pouring in, quiet evenings with tea and a book, maybe some jazz humming in the background, no one knocking on my door, no reminders to take out the trash or answer awkward questions at dinner. But that image began to fade the moment I rolled my suitcase across the creaky porch of my parents' beige house in the suburbs. It was early April. The sky had been threatening rain all day, and a thin, cold mist clung to everything, the kind that soaked into your jeans and made your skin feel like it didn't belong to you. My mom met me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She hugged me, firmly, formally, then patted my back like she was trying to send me somewhere I hadn't agreed to go. "Tomato meatballs tonight," she said, stepping aside. "Your favorite." I smiled back, but it didn't feel like my smile. Not really. It had been over 4 years, and somehow the house smelled exactly the same. Old wood, fabric softener, and something just a bit too clean, as if it had been scrubbed hard in anticipation. "I thought I'd just crash in my old room," I said, wheeling my suitcase through the hallway. "Of course," Mom replied, "though we did a little rearranging." She wasn't kidding. The posters were gone. The bookshelf had been cleared and replaced with a guest-style armchair. Even my bedspread had been swapped out for something beige and impersonal. My lamp, the one I used to keep on all night during finals week, was missing. Dad didn't say much when he came home from the hardware store. He nodded when he saw me and gave a quick, "Glad you're back," before disappearing into the living room. I could hear the familiar rustle of newspaper pages, the muted drone of cable news in the background. That night, over tomato meatballs and mashed potatoes, I broke the news. "I got the job," I said, trying to sound casual but proud. "Madison and Cole. It's a marketing firm downtown. Not huge, but solid starting salary. And they do quarterly bonuses." The clinking of forks paused. Mom put down her utensil. Not dropped, not slammed. Just set it down slowly, like a teacher pausing before a difficult lesson. Her eyes flicked toward Dad. He folded his napkin with unnecessary precision. "Are you planning to move out?" she asked, voice calm, even. I blinked, my smile freezing in place. "Well, yeah, probably in a few months. I just want to save up a little more first." The air shifted. Dad cleared his throat. That same familiar signal that meant something serious was about to be said. "Grace," he began, "your mom can only work part-time at the library now. Her back's been acting up again, and there's talk about layoffs at the plant." Mom nodded, placing her hand gently on mine. "We really hoped you'd stay for a while. With your new income, helping out here would make things so much easier." I stared at the meatball on my plate, suddenly too large, too red, too much. "I mean, I could help out for a bit," I said slowly. "Just a few months." "That's all we're asking," Dad said, but his tone felt final, like the door behind me had just closed. That week, I set up a spreadsheet on my laptop and started transferring part of my paycheck to help with groceries and utilities. I told myself it was temporary, just a few months, maybe 4. But my room began to change even more. My college boxes were moved to the attic. The armchair in the corner was now where Dad liked to sit during his afternoon naps. Mom began leaving laundry on my desk. One evening, I came home from work later than usual. My feet ached from standing in heels during a product launch, and my head throbbed with the weight of unfinished emails. I dropped my bag by the door, ready to microwave leftovers and collapse into bed. Instead, I found Mom in the living room, a manila envelope resting on the coffee table. "I already help with groceries," I said, trying not to let my voice rise, "and I've been paying the electric bill." Mom smiled, a soft, almost sad expression that somehow made me feel like the one being unreasonable. "That's just a start, sweetie. Think of this as your share. It's not rent, just family responsibility." I nodded, but something inside me shifted. The word temporary had started to lose its meaning, like a sticker peeling at the corners, refusing to stay where it was meant to. I looked at the envelope and knew this wasn't temporary anymore. At first, I thought I was just helping out, but month after month, it felt more like I was being absorbed. Mom used to say, "Family sticks together," whenever I hesitated about another errand or bill. But sticking together always seemed to mean me giving up something, my time, my paycheck, my weekends, while everyone else just stuck around. By the summer of 2016, the house felt different. Not louder exactly, but heavier. The kind of heaviness that settles in when no one talks about what's really happening. The walls still held family pictures from 10 years ago, but nothing new. I had been working full-time at Madison and Cole for over a year, and yet not one photo of me in my office clothes or with my coworkers made it onto the fridge. Saturday mornings were now reserved for grocery runs. Not for me, but for the household. I would take the family's old minivan, still smelling vaguely like pine cleaner and worn leather, and come home with bulk cereal, detergent, vegetables, and whatever meat was on sale. Mom would glance at the receipt, nod, and say, "Good girl," like I was 12 again. The bills kept coming. Electricity in July, air conditioning working overtime, internet, then health insurance. One Sunday evening, I was reviewing a report on my laptop when Mom knocked lightly and stepped in, carrying a stack of papers. "We were thinking," she said, smiling like she always did before asking something big. "Maybe you could help cover a portion of our health plan, just a small part. You know, for the family." I looked up. "I don't even have my own insurance yet." "You're young," she said, like that was a protective spell. "You'll be fine." Dad never said much. He just nodded along during these exchanges, like it was all common sense. And when I came home dragging my feet, my shirt sticking to my back from the heat and the stress, he'd mutter things like, "You're young, you'll bounce back," without ever looking away from the TV. It was around that time that Jessica started sending me little care packages, coffee beans she knew I liked, lemon-scented hand lotion, and once, a handwritten note that said, "You're allowed to be tired, you know." She invited me out to a weekend trip with her co-workers, but I declined. It wasn't just that I was tired. It was that I couldn't imagine leaving, not without someone saying I was selfish, dramatic, or worse, ungrateful. Then Rachel came back. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She and her husband Eric showed up with their 2 kids and an SUV packed full of luggage and toys. The moment they arrived, the house changed. Mom flew into a flurry, baking cookies, pulling out the nice tablecloth, lighting a cinnamon candle like she was expecting royalty. Dad turned off his sports channel to help Eric unload the car. When Rachel walked through the door, she laughed like she owned the place. The kids barreled through the hallway, their sticky hands brushing the walls, their voices filling every corner of the house. My room became their base camp. "Just while they're visiting," Mom assured me. I moved to the guest room, which now held the remains of my high school desk and the treadmill no one used. There was no space to put my work files, no quiet corner to decompress. The AC rattled in the corner, overworked and wheezing. That night, we had a big dinner. Lasagna, garlic bread, and Mom's signature spinach salad. All Rachel's favorites. Mine sat cold on my plate by the time I finally took a bite. No one asked about my job, or the client I'd just landed, or the campaign I'd stayed late to finish. The conversation orbited around Rachel. The new house they were planning to buy, the preschool her oldest had just been accepted to, the organic brand of shampoo she swore by. Mom, eyes shining, turned to Dad and said, "Our real star, huh?" He smiled like he was watching fireworks. I didn't say anything. I just chewed, slowly, pushing my food around, letting the garlic taste go flat in my mouth. After dinner, I was clearing dishes when Rachel appeared behind me, wine glass in hand. "You're still living here?" she asked, tilting her head, that smirk playing on her lips. "Yeah," I replied, not turning to look at her. "Helping Mom and Dad out." She sipped her wine. Interesting. That was all she said, but the weight of it clung to me like humidity on my skin. "Grace," she said with that same careful voice, "your father and I went over the numbers. With your salary, you could contribute a little more to the household. Nothing big, just enough to ease the burden." She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside were neatly printed spreadsheets, electricity, water, internet, line items highlighted, circled. My name penciled in beside a few of them. Later that night, I lay in the guest bed, my back to the treadmill, ceiling fan spinning overhead. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just hollow. I stared at the ceiling and thought, I'm disappearing. Somewhere between the heating bill and the preschool worksheets, I stopped recognizing my own life. Jessica once joked I was the live-in auntie. Back then, I laughed. Now, I wasn't sure it was a joke anymore. By fall of 2017, Rachel's temporary stay had settled into permanence, like an old stain on the carpet. She and Alex were still waiting on construction permits, or zoning approval, or whatever new excuse they rotated through that month. Their kids, Ella and Mason, treated the house like a jungle gym. My parents doted on them like royalty. And me? I was just the help. I worked 9 to 5 at the office, campaign launches, client meetings, back-to-back deadlines. Then I came home and switched into unpaid nanny mode, bouncing Mason on one hip while reheating leftovers with the other, helping Ella sound out words from sticky alphabet books, then folding laundry Rachel left in piles near the washer. Dinner was chaotic. Cartoon music in the background, sippy cups tipping over, juice puddles creeping across the table. I rarely ate hot food anymore. Mine always sat waiting until everyone else was full and gone. Rachel had taken to leaving me little to-do lists on the fridge. Ella's reading sheets, Mason's vitamins, fold towels. She'd write them in pink marker, always with a heart at the end, as if that made it less patronizing. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find a full list waiting, and Rachel at the mirror in the hallway applying lipstick. "We're heading out. Just dinner and a movie," she said, glancing at me like I was a babysitter she'd hired. I opened my mouth, ready to say I had plans. Jessica and I were supposed to go to a small art market downtown, something we'd been trying to coordinate for weeks. But before I could speak, Mom came in holding Mason, her voice already pleading. "Grace, please. Rachel and Alex haven't had a night out in ages. And the kids adore you. You're the only one they listen to." I stood there for a moment, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to remind them that I had a life, too, that I needed rest, that I had things I cared about. But instead, I nodded. Again. That night, I texted Jessica to cancel. She sent back, "You're not a backup parent," and added a sad face emoji. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting my phone face down. The days blurred. Each one looked like the last. I started setting my alarm earlier just to have a quiet moment before the kids woke up and chaos resumed. My laptop, once my pride, sleek, clean, the gateway to all the things I thought I'd become, now had crayon marks along the edge. One afternoon, I opened it to find Mason had spilled juice on a folder labeled Client A, Final Revision. I tried to dab it clean, but the ink had already bled. That evening, I found Rachel lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Can you watch them tomorrow morning too?" she asked without looking up. "Alex and I are checking out another open house." I inhaled slowly. "Actually, I can't. I have plans." She blinked, looked up. "What do you mean?" I can't. I'm not free." Mom emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Grace, don't be difficult." "I'm not being difficult," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "I just can't do it." Rachel stood, her mouth tightening. "Wow, really nice, Grace. Must be hard saying no when you don't have a family of your own to worry about." That one cut deep, but I didn't flinch. Dad looked up from his recliner and said, "Don't start a scene. We all have to pitch in." "But I'm the only one pitching anything," I muttered. Silence stretched. Then Mom delivered it like a gentle slap wrapped in lace. "Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word stuck to my skin like syrup. I turned and walked away, past the toys on the floor, past the juice stain that still shimmered under the kitchen light. My laptop sat on the dining table, its corner stained, the folder still damp, curling at the edges. I stood in the hallway listening to their voices rising, sharp, defensive, distant. My name flicked in and out of the sentences, always in a tone that made it sound like I was the problem. The hallway was dim, lit only by the old wall sconce above me. The floor creaked beneath my feet, and in that moment I thought, this house is no longer mine. The day they asked me to give up my room was the day something snapped. It was the second week of January, and the sky outside looked like wet cotton, gray, sagging, pressed low over the rooftops. Inside the house, it was warmer, but the air felt thick. Every room echoed with noise, cartoons, phone calls, Masons whining, Ella's screeches. The walls themselves seemed to shudder under the weight of it all. Dad used to say, "Family means sacrifice." I used to nod, quietly accepting the wisdom in his voice, but I hadn't realized it meant I'd be the only one doing the sacrificing. It started, like most things in this house, with a knock on my door. I was reviewing campaign edits on my laptop when Mom stepped in, her hands wringing the corner of her sweater. Behind her, Dad hovered, unusually quiet. "Grace," she began, using the tone that always preceded a request. "We need to talk." I closed my laptop slowly. "Okay." She glanced at Dad, who cleared his throat. "It's about your room," he said. "Rachel and Alex. They're having a hard time. Craig just lost his job and the kids, they're already staying here," I interrupted, keeping my tone even. "They need more space," Mom said quickly, as if racing past the discomfort. "We were thinking, Ella and Mason could have your room. You'd move into the storage room, just for a little while." I stared at them. The storage room. A glorified closet that still smelled like old cardboard and mothballs. A room with no windows, a slanted ceiling, and piles of forgotten decorations. "And me?" I asked. "You'll adjust," Dad said, his arms crossed. "You're young." Something in me went quiet. Not angry, not defensive, just still. And in that stillness, I saw things clearly for the first time. I nodded. "Fine." They blinked, surprised. Maybe they expected a fight. Maybe they wanted one. Something to turn into a story about how ungrateful I was. But I gave them nothing. That weekend, I moved my belongings into the storage room. Each box I carried felt like shedding a layer of who I used to be. My bed barely fit. My clothes hung limply from a portable rack. I placed my laptop on an old TV tray, the only surface that didn't slope. From my new corner of the house, I watched the transformation unfold. My old room was repainted in cheerful pastels, decorated with cartoon posters. Toys filled the drawers. My books disappeared. No one asked. No one offered to help. Jessica texted me that night. "You okay?" I replied. "I'm tired." But the truth was deeper. I felt erased. The days grew longer, not in time, but in weight. The kids were everywhere. Their toys covered the hallway. Their voices filled the bathroom. Their crumbs stuck to the couch. I started waking up an hour earlier just to beat the morning traffic of tiny feet in cereal bowls. At work, I was distracted. I missed a meeting, sent the wrong file to a client. My supervisor pulled me aside gently, and asked if everything was all right at home. I lied. Just a lot going on. Back at the house, dinner turned into a performance. Rachel always had a story. How hard things were, how brave they were being. Alex mostly scrolled his phone, grunting in agreement. When I brought up how high the utility bills had gotten, Mom gave me a tired look. "You know things are tight." "I'm covering more than half of it," I said. "You're doing fine," Dad added, not meeting my eyes. So one night, I waited for the moment. The pause between bites, the lull in conversation. I laid my fork down carefully and looked up. "From now on," I said quietly, "I'll pay only my share. The rest is on you all." The room went still. Rachel blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Dad leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "You don't get to dictate." "I'm not dictating. I'm setting a boundary," I said. Rachel laughed, sharp and cold. "Wow, if you walk out, don't come back." I met her gaze without flinching. Good. That word landed in the room like a dropped plate. No yelling, no slamming doors, just one word that split something wide open. I stood up, plate in hand, and walked to the kitchen. Their voices rose behind me, questions, protests, complaints, but I didn't turn around. I was done being the help, done being invisible, done being quiet. In that moment, for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The air in Rachel's apartment was loud. The air at Jessica's, still, quiet, mine. I remember sitting on Jessica's couch that first night, wrapped in a mismatched blanket with a chipped mug of chamomile tea in my hands. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette that barely fit the two of us, but it felt like a cathedral. Every inch was sacred because not one corner was laced with expectation. Jessica hadn't asked for explanations, just hugged me when I showed up with a single suitcase and tired eyes. She gave me the couch and the good throw pillow, made hot soup, and let the silence fill in the rest. "I don't need the details," she'd said. "Just rest." And I did. For the first time in what felt like years, I slept without interruption. No footsteps stomping down the hallway, no blaring cartoons at dawn, no sticky fingers tapping at my door, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock. But rest, I learned, doesn't erase guilt overnight. My phone buzzed relentlessly. First Mom. "Grace, how could you do this to us?" Then Dad. "You walked out on your family." "We didn't raise you to be selfish." Rachel followed, less subtle. "The kids keep asking about you. Guess you don't care." I stared at those messages for a long time, my thumb hovering over each one. Then I blocked them all. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of preservation. The silence afterward was heavy, but it was mine. I spent the next few days scrolling rental listings. Most of them were depressing. Basement units with rust-colored carpets, apartments with broken heaters, rooms that seemed to lean sideways. But then I found it. A tiny 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a weathered old house with warped wood floors and peeling paint, but with sunlight pouring in through 2 tall windows. I signed the lease with shaky hands. Jessica helped me move what little I had, mostly books, some clothes, my laptop. We bought secondhand furniture together, a sagging armchair, a wobbly coffee table, a set of mismatched plates. I found a twin bed frame at a thrift store and bought a mattress from someone on Craigslist who offered to deliver it for free. When the last box was inside, we stood in the middle of the room, sweaty and windblown from the January chill. Jessica smiled. "It's not much, but it's yours." I cried. Just a little. That night, I stood in the kitchen, my kitchen, stirring a pot of soup with a wooden spoon. The scent of garlic and onion filled the space. I opened the window, just slightly, and let the cold air kiss my face. Out on the street, snow began to fall. Not in sheets, not angrily, just soft, drifting flakes like the sky had finally exhaled. I sat by the window with my bowl and watched the world turn white. In the days that followed, I began piecing together a life. I bought a journal and started writing again. Not work emails or grocery lists, but thoughts, feelings. I enrolled in a yoga class at the community center and met a woman named Joan who reminded me of my favorite professor. I walked around the neighborhood in the early evenings, scarf tucked into my coat, breathing in the scent of chimney smoke and pine. The apartment was old, the floors creaked, the heater groaned like an old man, but it was quiet. It was still. It was mine. And then one night, I sat at my little desk under the window with a cup of peppermint tea and wrote in my journal, "I deserve to be loved, respected, and free." I underlined the last word twice. Freedom wasn't fireworks or grand declarations. It was in the quiet things. Folding my laundry without anyone else's socks mixed in, choosing what to eat without a dozen opinions hovering, hearing my own thoughts again after years of everyone else's noise. The phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, saw a block number, and didn't even reach for it. Instead, I sipped my tea, turned the page, and kept writing. I used to think freedom meant silence. Now I know it means choosing who gets to enter my peace. The sun had barely risen, casting a warm blush over the city as I poured hot coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the little chip on the rim and a hand-painted sunflower. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the radiator and a faint piano melody drifting from the Bluetooth speaker. The smell of toasted sourdough and vanilla creamer filled the air. It was ordinary, but to me, it felt like a hymn. This was my home. Not because I owned it or because it was grand, but because every inch of it reflected me, my choices, my peace, my presence. The once sparse apartment had evolved. There were framed prints on the walls now, soft rugs underfoot, tiny plants thriving on the windowsills. I had built something, slowly, carefully, out of nothing but self-respect and time. Dad once said, "You'll regret walking away." But I haven't. Not once. I take Saturday morning walks to the park now, thermos in hand, watching golden retrievers chase tennis balls and toddlers wobble after pigeons. There's a bench near the fountain where I often sit to journal, something I never made time for before. Some entries are just observations. Others are reminders to myself. And then there are the ones that read like small victories. Baked banana bread and didn't feel guilty for resting afterward. Booked a solo trip to Asheville for the weekend. Laughed, like really laughed, with a coworker over coffee. It hasn't all been perfect. Some days are still tender, especially around the holidays. The invitations still come in, texts from mom, voicemails from dad, messages with pictures of the kids, now older, now taller. But I've learned the difference between peace and pressure. I reply with short, kind messages when I want to. When I don't, I don't. The last birthday message from Rachel was a long one, a carefully constructed guilt trip disguised as concern. "Ella misses you. You're missing out on so much family time." I read it once, let the weight of it sit there, and then deleted it without response. Family, I've learned, isn't defined by obligation. It's defined by care, mutual, consistent, and free of manipulation. Jessica and I still meet every other Thursday at our favorite cafe. It's tucked on a quiet corner downtown, all exposed brick and warm lighting, the kind of place that remembers your name and your drink order. We laugh more than we talk. She always asks the same question before we leave. "Are you good?" And I always tell her the truth. This week, I sat there alone for a while before she arrived, my journal open on the table, steam rising from my mug. I looked around. Students tapping on laptops, a couple arguing gently over brunch plans, a barista singing under her breath. And realized something. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore, not waiting for approval or for someone to ask how I was doing or for recognition that might never come. I was already here, present in my own life. Later that evening, back at my apartment, I pulled out a fresh notebook. The cover was soft blue, smooth to the touch. I opened it, picked up my pen, and wrote on the first page, "This is my life, and I get to write it." Then I closed the notebook and set it on the table, beside a candle that smelled like sea salt and rosemary. The light flickered gently, catching the edges of the words I'd written. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, cars passing, windows glowing, dogs barking faintly in the distance. But inside my apartment, all was still. And in that stillness, I smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd won, the smile of someone who'd come home to herself. Of all the changes I made, choosing peace over approval was the one that saved me. Sitting in that quiet cafe, notebook open, I realized that healing doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it whispers through still mornings and steady breath. Sometimes family isn't who raised us, but who respects us. I learned that love without respect becomes duty, and duty without choice becomes a cage. In life, we don't owe anyone our silence just to keep the peace. Real love never asks that of us. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a lesson, or just a quiet thought, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share your reflections or join us again for more stories that remind us how strong and gentle the human heart can be.